I smelled it before I heard it, that distinct, sickening scent of seared meat. At first, I thought the neighbors were grilling, maybe burning a steak on a high flame. Then came the scream. It wasn't a normal cry, it was a jagged, high-pitched shriek that tore through the quiet of the woods like a gunshot. It was the sound of a soul breaking. It was my son. And when I saw what they had done to his hands, the father in me died, and the ranger woke up. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I've spent the last 10 years trying to forget what men are capable of. I moved us out here to the edge of the forest, just outside a town that prides itself on old money and family values, specifically to get away from the violence. I wanted Evan to grow up soft. I wanted him to know about fishing and hiking and reading books by the fireplace. I didn't want him to know a single thing about the world I used to inhabit. I'm a simple man now, or at least that's the costume I wear. I drive a beat-up 2015 Ford truck. I wear flannel shirts with frayed collars. I work odd jobs in construction, fixing porches for the wealthy folks up on the hill. To them, I'm just Hunter, the guy who wipes his boots before coming inside to fix their drywall. They don't look at me twice. They don't know that the holding company that owns the bank their mortgages are signed to has my signature on the incorporation papers. I keep my wealth buried deep. Money attracts parasites. I wanted peace, but peace ended at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was in the garage sharpening a chisel when that smell hit me. It was sweet and copper-tangy. Nausea rolled in my gut instantly because I knew that smell. I'd smelled it overseas. Then the back door crashed open. "Dad! Dad!" It wasn't a call for help. It was a plea for it to stop. I dropped the chisel and ran. Evan was standing in the kitchen, his knees buckling. He was 14 years old, lanky, with hair that always fell in his eyes. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering, making a clicking sound that echoed in the silent room. He was holding his arms out in front of him, stiff like a zombie. I froze. For 1 second, my brain refused to process the image. His hands, they weren't hands anymore. They were red, blistered ruins. The skin on his palms was bubbling, peeling back and wet raw sheets. The tips of his fingers were charred black. "Evan," I whispered. I didn't shout. In a crisis, I go quiet. It's a habit. "Evan, look at me." He looked up, his eyes wide, pupils blown to pin pricks from the shock. Tears were streaming down his face, but he wasn't making a sound anymore. He was hyperventilating. "Make it stop," he wheezed. "Please, Dad, it burns." "It won't stop burning." I didn't ask what happened. Not yet. There was no time. I grabbed a clean sheet from the laundry basket, soaking it gently in cool water. Not cold, never cold on a burn, and wrapped his hands loosely. He screamed again when the cloth touched him, a sound that made my blood run cold. I carried him to the truck. I broke every speed limit getting to the county hospital. The drive was a blur of red lights and Evan's whimpering. Every bump in the road made him gasp. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather cracked under my fingers. I was scanning the perimeter looking for threats. My heart rate barely rising even though my world was ending. That's the training. Emotional detachment until the mission is done. But looking at my boy curled up in the passenger seat, smelling the smoke coming off his clothes, the detachment was failing. The emergency room doctors were fast. They rushed him behind double doors. I was left in the waiting room with the flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. I paced. For steps left, turn. For steps right, turn. An hour later, a doctor came out. "Dr. Evans?" He looked pale. He looked angry. "Mr. Hunter, how is he?" I asked. My voice sounded like gravel, stable. "We've managed the pain with morphine, but these are third-degree burns, sir. Deep tissue damage. He might need skin grafts." The nerves in his fingertips. He trailed off, shaking his head. "He plays guitar, doesn't he? You told me that once." I nodded slowly. "Yes. He won't play for a long time. Maybe never again." The silence between us was heavy. "Mr. Hunter." The doctor lowered his voice, stepping closer. "I have to report this. This wasn't an accident. These aren't contact burns from grabbing a hot pan. The pattern it's consistent with his hands being forced onto a surface or having an accelerant poured on them." I felt a cold pressure behind my eyes. "Forced?" "Someone held him down," the doctor said grimly. "There are bruises on his wrists shaped like fingers. 4 or 5 different sets of hands. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't bullying, this was torture. Can I see him?" "He's groggy, but yes." I walked into the room. Evan was lying in the bed, his hands wrapped in thick white bandages that looked like boxing gloves. He was staring at the ceiling, his eyes empty. I pulled the chair up. I didn't touch him. I was afraid I'd break him. Evan, I said softly. He didn't blink. Who did this? He flinched. I fell, he whispered. The lie was so weak it broke my heart. You didn't fall, I said. Dr. Evans saw the bruises. Who held you down? I fell into a campfire, he recited, robotic. It was my fault. I'm clumsy, Evan. I put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched away from me violently, terror flashing across his face. He was afraid of me because he thought I couldn't protect him, or worse, he thought telling me would get him killed. I saw the corner of a piece of paper sticking out of the pocket of his ruined hoodie, which was draped over the chair. I reached for it. No. Evan tried to sit up, panic spiking on the monitor. Dad, don't. Please, just throw it away. I ignored him. I pulled the paper out. It was expensive stationery, the kind with a heavy grain, cream-colored. I unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, aggressive. This is what happens when trash is treasure. Tell anyone and next time it won't be your hands. Next time we light up your face, we know where you live, cabin boy. I stared at the note. I reread it 3 times. Trash touches treasure. I knew exactly who spoke like that. I knew exactly which group of boys Evan had been having trouble with. Julian, the son of the bank owner, the golden boy of the town. I looked at my son, unconscious again as the sedatives took hold. I looked at his bandaged hands, hands that used to build Lego sets with me, hands that were learning to play Blackbird on the acoustic guitar I bought him for Christmas. They burned him. They held him down laughing and they burned him. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. I walked out of the hospital room and into the cool night air. I stood in the parking lot, looking up at the stars. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 6 years. It went to a secure voicemail. It's Ranger 4 Alpha. I said into the darkness. Reactivate my tracking clearance. I have a target. I hung up. They thought they burned a poor kid's hands. They thought his father was a nobody who would take the beating and stay silent. They thought money made them gods. I got into my truck and turned the engine over. The headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the road leading back to the woods. The dad who fixed porches was gone. The man driving the truck now was someone else entirely. And he was hungry. I didn't drive straight to the woods. The soldier in me wanted to. The part of me that knew how to dismantle a threat with extreme prejudice was screaming to hunt them down right then and there. But the father in me, the man I had tried so hard to become for Evan, needed to give the world one chance to be decent. I needed to prove to myself that we didn't live in a war zone. I was wrong. I drove to the police station first. It was a small brick building that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. I walked in, still wearing my sawdust-covered work boots, holding the plastic bag with the threatening note inside. Officer Miller was at the desk. I knew him. I'd fixed his roof last summer for half price because he complained about his alimony payments. Miller, I said, slamming the bag onto the counter. I want to file a report. Assault, torture. My son is in the hospital with third-degree burns. Miller didn't even look up from his paperwork. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Hunter, keep your voice down. You're disturbing the peace. Disturbing the peace. My voice was low, vibrating in my chest. Julian and his friends held my son down and burned his hands. They left a note threatening to burn his face next. Read it. Miller glanced at the bag, then back at me. His eyes were flat, bored. Look, Hunter, kids play rough. We got a call from Mr. Victor earlier. Said his boy Julian came home with a bruise on his shin. Said, your boy Evan started a fight and got hurt when he fell near a grill. Sounds like mutual combat to me. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Mutual combat? Evan was tied down. Dr. Evans confirmed the bruising patterns. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution that stopped halfway. Miller sighed, leaning back in his chair. The wood creaked. If you file a report, I have to investigate both sides. Julian's father has expensive lawyers, Hunter. They'll turn this around. They'll say you're neglecting the boy. Child Protective Services will be knocking on your cabin door by morning. Do you really want that? A single dad living in a shack, barely making ends meet. The threat hung in the air like smoke. He wasn't protecting the law. He was protecting the payroll. Victor owned this town, and by extension, he owned the badge on Miller's chest. I see, I said softly. You're not going to help. Go home, Hunter. Put some ice on the kid's hands. Don't start a war you can't afford. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently. That was the first seal broken. The law was gone. Next was the school. I drove to Northwood High. The parking lot was filled with Range Rovers and BMWs. My rusted Ford stuck out like a sore thumb. I walked straight to the administration building. I needed to see Clara. She was the principal. We went to high school together 30 years ago. I'd helped her fix a flat tire in the rain just last month. She was a good person, or so I thought. Her secretary tried to stop me, but I walked right past her and opened Clara's door. Clara was standing by the window looking out at the football field. She turned, startled. When she saw my face, she didn't smile. She looked pale, terrified. "Hunter," she whispered. "You shouldn't be here." "Check the cameras, Clara," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "It happened on school grounds behind the bleachers." "I know it did." She looked down at her desk, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "The cameras were down for maintenance yesterday. Hunter, we have no footage." "Maintenance," I repeated all of them. "At the exact time my son was being mutilated. It's just unfortunate timing." I stepped closer. I could smell her perfume. Expensive stuff. Too expensive for a principal's salary. "Clara, look at me." She refused. "They burned his hands," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "He plays guitar. You know that. You've seen him play at the talent show. They took that from him. Julian did it. If you don't expel him, if you don't call the police right now, you are an accessory." Clara finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set in a hard line. "Julian's father just donated $2 million for the new library. Hunter, the board has tied my hands. If I make a move against Julian, I lose my job. I lose my pension." She took a breath, her voice hardening. "Maybe Evan should transfer. There's a public school 2 towns over. He might fit in better there with his own kind." His own kind. The betrayal hit me harder than Miller's corruption. Miller was a thug with a badge. Clara was supposed to be an educator. "You sold a child's safety for a library wing," I said. The disgust in my voice made her flinch. "I hope it's worth it." I turned to leave. As I walked out of the school, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It was Victor, Julian's father. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He had a perfectly groomed beard and eyes that looked like sharks swimming in oil. "Hunter," he called out cheerful. "Heard about the accident. Shame. Maybe teach the boy not to play with fire." He laughed. A deep, rich, confident laugh. He didn't know who I was. He saw a man in work boots. He saw a victim. I stopped. I looked at him. I memorized the shape of his face, the vein pulsing in his neck. "Enjoy the laugh, Victor," I said. "What was that?" he sneered, his smile dropping. "You threaten me, and I'll buy the land your shack sits on and bulldoze it while you're sleeping." I didn't answer. I got in my truck and drove away. The system had failed. The police were bought. The school was compromised. The enemy was emboldened. I went back to the cabin. The silence of the house was heavy. Evan was still at the hospital for observation, but his presence filled the room. His guitar sat in the corner, gathering dust. I walked into my bedroom and locked the door. I pushed aside the heavy oak dresser. Behind it, hidden in the wall, was a safe. I spun the dial. Right 40, left 12, right 5. Click! I opened it. Inside wasn't money. It was my past. I took out a satellite phone. I took out a tactical map of the county, and I took out a black case containing high-tech surveillance bugs and a thermal monocular. I didn't need a gun. Guns were loud. Guns were messy. I wanted them to know fear before they knew justice. I opened Evan's laptop, which was on the kitchen table. I guessed his password, Guitar Hero 01. I logged into his social media. I didn't look at his messages. I went straight to Julian's profile. It was public. Arrogance always leaves a trail. There was a post from 2 hours ago, a photo of Julian and 3 other boys, Blake, Colin, and Mason. They were standing in front of a luxury tent setup holding beer cans, grinning. The caption read, "Camping deep in the Kingswood. No rules, no parents. Winning." I knew exactly where that spot was. It was 5 miles into the dense forest near the old quarry. It was my woods. I owned that land through 3 shell companies. They were trespassing on the hunting grounds of the man they had just declared war on. I closed the laptop. I went to the shed. I grabbed a coil of climbing rope, a roll of duct tape, and my hunting knife. I put on my black tactical fatigues, the ones I hadn't worn since my last deployment. The sun was setting. The shadows were getting long. I walked out the back door and vanished into the treeing. I moved without making a sound. No twigs snapped. No leaves rustled. The dad was left back at the cabin. The ranger was on the hunt. The forest at night is a different world. To a civilian, it's chaos. Shadows that look like monsters. Sounds that trigger panic. To me, it's a grid. It's data. Wind direction. Terrain density. Noise discipline. I moved through the underbrush like smoke. 5 miles is nothing. I covered the ground in under an hour, moving in a low crouch, my breathing rhythmic and silent. The thermal monocular was strapped to my eye, turning the pitch-black woods into a landscape of glowing greens and whites. I smelled them before I saw them, not burning flesh this time, but expensive cologne, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of beer. I crested the ridge overlooking the old quarry. Below, in a clearing I knew well, was their setup. It looked more like a hotel suite than a campsite. A massive canvas tent with battery-powered string lights hung between the trees. A portable generator hummed softly, powering a speaker that was thumping bass-heavy rap music. A cooler the size of a coffin sat open, filled with ice and bottles. There were 4 of them. Julian was the loudest. He was sitting on a log mimicking someone crying. "Please stop, it burns," he whined in a high-pitched, mocking voice. The other boys, Blake, Colin, and Mason, roared with laughter. Blake kicked a log into the fire, sending sparks flying. "Did you see his face?" Colin wheezed, cracking open a beer. "He looked like a little girl, man. My dad said the cops didn't even file a report," said the white trash. "Dad just stood there and took it. My dad said he's going to buy their land next month." Julian bragged, tossing an empty can into the darkness. "Turn it into a parking lot for his new golf course." We basically did the world a favor, toughened the kid up. I lay flat on the ridge watching them through the scope. My pulse didn't jump, my hands didn't shake. The rage was there. A cold, hard knot in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Anger makes you sloppy. Calculation makes you dangerous. I needed to isolate them. Panic is contagious, but it starts with confusion. I slid down the ridge, circling their perimeter. I found the generator humming about 50 yards from their fire. I didn't cut the wire, that's too obvious. I pulled the spark plug cap just enough to break the connection, but keep it looking intact. The music died instantly. The lights flickered and went out. "Whoa, what happened?" Mason's voice drifted through the trees. "Generator probably died. Piece of junk," Julian snapped. "Blake, go check it. I'm not sitting in the dark." "Why me?" Blake wheezed. "Because I said so. Go." Perfect. Separation. I moved. I didn't walk. I flowed. I positioned myself 10 feet from the generator, deep in the shadow of a massive oak. I waited. Blake came stumbling through the brush using his phone flashlight. "Stupid thing," he muttered, kicking a branch. He reached the generator. He fiddled with the switches. "Guys, I think it's out of gas." I stepped out from behind the tree. I didn't touch him. I just snapped a dry branch in my hand. Crack. Blake spun around, his lights swinging wildly. "Who's there?" I stood perfectly still. My camouflage gear broke up my silhouette. To him, I was just part of the forest. "Julian, quit screwing around," Blake called out, his voice trembling slightly. I tossed a small rock to his left. Thump. He spun again. "Hello." Then I made the sound. A low guttural growl. Not an animal, but something human trying to sound like one. It's a psychological trigger. It makes the lizard brain freeze. Blake froze. I moved in. I came up behind him, my movement masked by the wind in the trees. I grabbed his phone hand and squeezed a pressure point on his wrist. He dropped the phone. Before it hit the ground, I caught it. "Go home," I whispered directly into his ear. My voice was barely a breath, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. Blake shrieked. He didn't look back. He didn't fight. He scrambled away, tripping over his own feet, running blindly back toward the fire. "There's someone out there," he screamed as he crashed into the clearing. "There's someone watching us." "Shut up, Blake," Julian's voice carried over. "You're probably scared of a deer." "No, he touched me. He took my phone." "You dropped it, you idiot. Go find it." "I'm not going back there." Chaos, confusion. Phase 1 complete. I stayed in the shadows, circling again. Now they were huddled closer to the fire. The bravado was slipping. The darkness beyond the firelight felt heavier now. They were realizing that the woods didn't care about their fath money. I picked up a heavy stone and hurled it high into the canopy above their tent. It crashed through the branches and landed with a heavy thud right next to the cooler. All 4 boys jumped. Mason scrambled backward, falling off his log. "That wasn't a deer," Colin whispered. I moved to the north side. I took out my knife and carved a quick marking into a tree trunk, a simple eye shape. Then I snapped another branch, louder this time. "Who is that?" Julian yelled, trying to sound tough but failing. He grabbed a burning stick from the fire, holding it like a weapon. My dad is Victor Vance. If you mess with us, you're dead. I smiled in the dark. Victor Vance isn't here, Julian. It's just us. I began to whistle, a slow, haunting tune. The same tune Evan had been learning on his guitar before they burned his fingers. Blackbird. The whistling drifted through the trees, echoing, coming from everywhere and nowhere. That song, Colin stammered. That's the song the freak was humming when we did it. Shut up, Julian hissed. He's in the hospital. It can't be him. Maybe it's his ghost, Mason whimpered. He's not dead. Stupid. I stopped whistling. Silence returned heavier than before. I waited for 20 minutes. I let the silence stretch until their nerves were fraying. They stopped talking. They were just staring into the dark, waiting for the monster. It was time to take the leader. I have to pee, Julian announced, standing up. He grabbed a flashlight. I'm not scared. I'm taking a leak, and then we're leaving. He walked to the edge of the clearing, but not far enough. He was terrified to go too deep. I was already there. I was lying flat in a depression in the ground, covered in leaves, not 5 feet from where he stopped. He unzipped his pants, his flashlight beam shaking. I rose up silently behind him. I didn't need violence, I needed dominance. I grabbed the back of his collar and yanked him backward into the darkness. He tried to scream, but I had a gloved hand over his mouth instantly. I dragged him 10 yards into the brush before his friends even realized he was gone. I slammed him against a tree, keeping my hand over his mouth. I leaned in close, my face covered by a tactical mask, only my eyes visible. Cold, dead eyes. You like fire, Julian? I whispered. He shook his head frantically, tears streaming down his face. The smell of urine soaked his pants. My son liked his hands, I said. Now we're going to have a talk, and if you lie to me, the woods will never let you leave. Julian was trembling so violently, I could feel the vibrations through my gloves. He wasn't the tough, arrogant leader anymore. He was a child who had realized for the first time in his life that there were consequences money couldn't fix. I kept him pinned against the rough bark of the oak tree. I didn't squeeze his neck. I didn't need to. The sheer proximity of a threat he couldn't see was suffocating him. Not if you understand me, I whispered. He nodded frantically. I slowly removed my hand from his mouth, but I kept my other hand firmly on his shoulder, a heavy weight reminding him he was trapped. I held up a small digital recorder in front of his face. The red light blinked in the darkness like a single unblinking eye. Speak, I commanded softly. Tell me everything. Who held him down? Who lit the fire? Who paid the principal? I didn't mean to. Julian blubbered, snot running down his nose. It was just a prank. We were just scaring him. I leaned in closer. A prank doesn't melt skin. Julian, a prank doesn't require a cover-up. Who held him? Blake and Mason, he cried out, selling out his friends instantly. They grabbed his arms. Collins sat on his legs. I just wanted to show him the lighter. He moved. It was his fault he moved. Liar, my voice was a low rumble. The doctors found bruises shaped like fingers. You forced his hands into the coals. Admit it, he sobbed, his body going limp. Okay, we did it. We wanted to see if he'd cry. He thinks he's better than us, because he plays that stupid music. My dad said people like him need to learn their place. And the principal, I pressed. Why didn't she check the cameras? My dad, Julian gasped for air. My dad called her. He told her he'd ruin her life if she didn't delete the footage. He gave the school money for the library to shut them up. Please don't kill me. I clicked the recorder off. Click. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the silent woods. I'm not going to kill you, Julian, I said, stepping back slightly, letting him breathe, but keeping him in my shadow. Death is easy. Living with what you've done, that's hard. I took a zip tie from my vest. Turn around. No, please turn around. He obeyed. I zipped his hands behind his back, loose enough not to cut circulation, but tight enough to make him helpless. Then I zipped his ankles together. You're going to stay here, I said, in the dark alone. No, the bears, the wolves, he shrieked. There are no wolves in these woods, I said coldly. Only me. Think about Evan's hands. Every time you get scared, every time you hear a twig snap, remember that pain. You bought this fear. I left him there, slumped at the base of the tree, weeping into the dirt. I moved back toward the campsite. The other 3 boys were in a panic. Julian Mason was screaming, "Where are you? We have to go." Blake was sobbing, clutching his car keys. "Screw the tent. Let's just go. We can't leave him, Colin yelled. I decided to speed up their departure. I flanked their position and found a heavy dead branch. I hurled it into the center of their dying fire. The impact sent a shower of sparks and ash exploding into the air. Whoosh! The sudden burst of light and noise sent them over the edge. Rit! Blake screamed. They didn't even look for Julian anymore. Self-preservation kicked in. They scrambled for their cars. Two shiny jeeps parked on the logging road nearby. Doors slammed. Engines roared to life. Tires spun in the mud as they peeled out, leaving their expensive gear, their beer, and their leader behind. I watched their taillights fade. I walked back to Julian. He had heard his friends leave. He knew he was abandoned. I cut the zip tie on his ankles. Run, I said from the darkness. He didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up, stumbling, falling, and getting back up, running blindly toward the road with his hands still bound behind him. He would have a long, terrifying walk home. I stood in the empty campsite. I looked at the expensive cooler, the wasted food, the symbol of their entitlement. I took out my knife and slashed the tent. One long, clean cut, then another. I kicked over the cooler. I picked up the note I had found in Evan's pocket. The one about trash touching treasure. I tossed it into the dying embers of their fire and watched it curl into black ash. I had the confession. I had the fear. Now I needed to prepare for the backlash. I made my way back through the woods, moving faster now. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I reached my truck at the trailhead. I drove home in silence. When I got to the cabin, the sun was just starting to hint at the horizon, a bruise of purple and gray. I went inside. I showered, scrubbing the mud and camouflage paint off my skin. I put on my flannel shirt and jeans. I sat at the kitchen table and plugged the digital recorder into my laptop. I transferred the file. I made 3 copies, one to a cloud server, one to a secure drive, one to a USB stick I kept in my boot. Then I waited. It didn't take long. At 7 a.m., a black SUV tore up my gravel driveway, followed by a sheriff's cruiser. I watched from the window as Victor jumped out of the SUV. He looked disheveled, furious. Sheriff Miller was right behind him, looking tired and annoyed. They hammered on my door. I picked up my coffee mug. I took a sip. It was hot, black, and bitter, just how I liked it. I opened the door. "Where is he?" Victor roared, pushing past me into my living room. "Where is that psycho?" "Good morning to you too, Victor," I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "Sheriff, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't play games, Hunter," Victor screamed, his face purple. "My son walked home 5 miles. He was tied up. He said a monster attacked them in the woods. He's hysterical. He's saying you try to kill him." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. "Hunter, Julian claims you assaulted him and his friends. Kidnapping, terroristic threats. That's a felony. I'm going to need you to come with us." I looked at Miller, then I looked at Victor. "Did Julian tell you what he told the monster?" I asked softly. Victor froze. "What did he tell you about the confession?" I asked. "About the fire? About the bribe you paid the principal?" Victor's eyes darted to Miller, a flicker of true fear. "He's lying," Victor spat. "My son is traumatized. Anything he said under duress is inadmissible. Maybe in a court of law," I said, stepping closer to Victor. I was 3 and taller than him and broader. He took an involuntary step back. "But the court of public opinion, they don't care about inadmissible. They just care about the truth. You have nothing," Victor hissed. "You're a nobody, a construction worker. I will bury you in legal fees. I will take this shack. I will have you thrown in prison for 20 years. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Get off my property," I said. "You're under arrest," Miller barked, pulling his handcuffs. "Am I?" I asked. "On what evidence? Did you find me at the scene? Do you have DNA or do you have the word of 4 drunk teenagers who were trespassing on private land?" Miller hesitated. He knew the terrain. He knew without proof an arrest wouldn't stick, especially if I lawyered up. "We'll be back with a warrant," Miller threatened. "Don't leave town. I'm not going anywhere. I promised." Victor glared at me one last time. "You made a mistake, Hunter. You touched my family. You're done." They stormed out. I watched them drive away. They thought they were the predators. They thought this was the end of it. But I knew the truth. I walked back to my laptop. I opened an email draft. The recipient was the state attorney general, a man I had served with in the Rangers 20 years ago. Attached confession julianvance.mp3. I hit send. The hunt had just moved from the woods to the city. The war had begun, But Victor didn't know he was fighting a ghost. He thought he was crushing a bug. For 2 days, they tried to suffocate me. It started with the small things. My credit card was declined at the gas station. The utility company called to say my power would be cut off due to an administrative error. Then came the construction foreman, a good man named Dave, who looked at his boots when he told me he had to let me go. "I'm sorry, Hunter," Dave said, twisting his cap in his hands. "The big contract for the new mall. The investors said they pull the funding if you're on the crew. I can't lose this job, man. I got kids." "I understand, Dave." I said, "It's not your fault." I didn't tell him that I could buy the entire construction firm with the interest my accounts earned in a week. I just took my final paycheck and walked away. I needed them to think they were winning. I needed them to overextend. I spent my days at the hospital with Evan. The skin grafts were painful. He spent most of the time sleeping or staring out the window. He wouldn't look at his hands. The bandages were thick, white, and heavy. "Dad," he asked on the 3rd afternoon. His voice was raspier than usual. "Yeah, bud." "Are they going to jail?" The question hung in the sterile air. "I'm working on it," I said. "Julian posted a picture today," Evan whispered. "He's at a pool party. He's laughing." My blood ran cold. I checked my phone. Sure enough, Julian was back on social media. No shame, no remorse. A photo of him with sunglasses holding a drink, caption, "Can't touch this. #invincible. They thought the monster in the woods was just a scare tactic. They thought their dads had fixed it. He won't be laughing for long. I promised Evan. That evening, I went back to the cabin. A black sedan was waiting for me. 2 men in suits leaned against the hood. Private security. I recognized the type. Ex-cops or dishonorably discharged military. Muscle for hire. "Mr. Hunter," the taller one said. He had a scar on his chin and a sneer on his lips. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Vance and the concerned families." "Trespassing," I said, getting out of my truck. "You're on private property. We have an offer." The man said, ignoring me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He tossed it onto the hood of my truck. It landed with a heavy slap. "5,000, he said. Cash unmarked. I looked at the envelope. "For what?" "Relocation assistance," the man smirked. "Mr. Vance thinks this town isn't a good fit for you and your son anymore. Too many bad memories. He's offering you a chance to start fresh somewhere far away, like Montana or hell. And if I refuse," the second man stepped forward. He cracked his knuckles. "Then things get harder. The sheriff finds a reason to raid this place. Maybe he finds drugs. Maybe he finds stolen goods. Maybe your truck brakes fail on a winding road. Accidents happen, Hunter." It was so cliché it was almost funny. They were using the bully playbook page by page. I picked up the envelope. It felt light. $5,000. That was less than the cost of the bottle of wine I had in my hidden cellar. $5,000, I said, weighing it in my hand. "That's the price of my son's hands. That's the price of justice. Take it and go," the scarred man said, "before the offer expires." I opened the envelope. I pulled out the stack of $100 bills. "You know," I said, looking at the money in the Rangers, "we learned about leverage. You don't negotiate with terrorists. You eliminate the asset they value most." "What are you babbling about?" the man spat. I ripped the stack of bills in half. The sound was crisp. The men's eyes widened. I ripped it again. Quarters, then eights. I threw the confetti of money into the air. The wind caught it, scattering Benjamin Franklin's into the mud. "Tell Victor," I said, my voice dropping to that dangerous quiet register, "that he doesn't have enough money to buy me out, and tell him I'm not the one who needs to leave town." The scarred man lunged at me. "You ungrateful piece of yo." He threw a punch. It was slow, telegraphed. I sidestepped. I caught his wrist, used his momentum, and slammed him face first into the hood of my truck. Crunch! I twisted his arm behind his back until he cried out. "I gave you a chance to leave," I whispered into his ear. "Now you leave with a broken wrist, or a broken ego. Choose." The other man reached for his waistband. "A gun." "Don't," I warned him. "Draw that weapon, and you'll never hold a gun again." He froze. He saw my eyes. He saw the look of a man who had killed people far more dangerous than Renops. He slowly raised his hands. I shoved the scarred man away. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face pale. "You're dead, Hunter," he screamed. "You have no idea who you just declared war on." "Get off my land," I said. They scrambled into their sedan and reversed down the driveway, gravel spraying everywhere. I stood there among the torn money. The escalation was complete. They had tried fear. They had tried bribery. They had tried violence. They had failed 3 times. Now it was my turn. I went inside and made a call. I said when the line connected. Was my personal attorney, not a local lawyer, a shark from New York City who cost $2,000 an hour. Hunter, it's been a while, Arthur's smooth voice answered. Everything okay? No. I need you to execute Protocol 7. There was a pause on the line. Protocol 7 was the nuclear option. It was the strategy we had set up years ago in case my identity was ever compromised or I needed to destroy a business rival completely. Protocol 7? Arthur asked, sounding surprised. Hunter, that's aggressive. That involves asset freezing, forensic audits, and hostile takeovers. Who is the target? Victor Vance, I said. Vance Regional Bank and the personal assets of the families of Blake, Collin, and Mason. Vance. Arthur chuckled. Hunter, you own the holding company that underwrites their commercial loans. You could call in their debt tomorrow and bankrupt them by noon. Exactly, I said. But I don't want them bankrupt yet. I want them exposed. I want every dirty deal, every bribe, every paid-off official brought into the light. Start with the school board donations, then the police pinion fund. Understood, Arthur said, his tone shifting to professional steel. I'll have a team on it within the hour. When do you want to drop the hammer? Wait for my signal, I said. Let them think they're safe for one more day. Let them have their pool parties. I hung up. I walked over to the calendar on the wall. I circled the date. Tomorrow was the town hall meeting. The mayor, the sheriff, and the school board would all be there. Victor Vance was scheduled to receive a Philanthropist of the Year award for his library donation. It was the perfect stage. I wasn't going to hide in the woods anymore. I was going to walk right into their spotlight and burn it down. I went to my closet. I pushed past the flannel shirts and the work pants. In the back, in a garment bag, was a suit, a bespoke charcoal gray Italian suit. I ran my hand over the fabric. The ranger had hunted them in the woods. Now the billionaire was going to hunt them in the boardroom. The next morning felt different. The air was charged, heavy with the kind of electricity you feel right before a thunderstorm breaks. I spent the morning checking on Evan. He was sitting up watching cartoons, but his eyes were distant. Dad, he said, not looking away from the screen, Dr. Evans says I can go home in 2 days. That's good news, buddy. Is it? He finally looked at me. If I go home, I have to go back to school. I have to see them. You won't have to see them, I said, adjusting his pillow. Trust me. How can you stop them? He asked, his voice small and broken. They own everything. I kissed his forehead. Not everything. I left the hospital at 4 p.m. The town hall meeting was at 6 p.m. I drove back to the cabin. I showered and shaved for the first time in a week. I looked at myself in the mirror. The tired, rugged construction worker stared back. I washed my face with cold water, then I put on the suit. The charcoal fabric fit perfectly. It was armor of a different kind. I put on a white shirt, crisp and starched. I tied a silk tie. I slipped on a pair of polished black Oxfords. When I looked in the mirror again, Hunter, the handyman, was gone. Standing there was Hunter Sterling, the man who had built a logistics empire from the ground up after leaving the military. The man who had walked away from boardrooms in Tokyo and London to live in a cabin. I grabbed the USB drive with the confession. I grabbed a folder of documents Arthur had emailed me, financial records that were about to ruin several lives. I didn't take my rusted Ford truck. I walked to the back of the garage, pulled the tarp off the vehicle I hadn't driven in 3 years. A matte black Land Rover Defender, armored, sleek. I turned the key. The engine purred like a resting tiger. I drove into town. The town hall was packed. The parking lot was full of luxury cars. Victor Vance's black Mercedes was parked right in the front, in a spot marked reserved for VIP. I parked the Land Rover right behind it, blocking him in. I walked up the steps. The security guard at the door, a kid named Toby, who usually waved at me when I bought lumber, didn't recognize me at first. He stepped forward to block my path. Sir, this is a private event for Heath. He stopped. He squinted. Hunter, is that you? Evening, Toby, I said. I'm here for the show. I walked past him before he could process the change. Inside, the auditorium was buzzing. Chandeliers sparkled. Waiters passed around champagne. At the front of the room on a raised stage sat the mayor, Sheriff Miller, Principal Clara, and Victor Vance. Victor looked like a king. He was laughing, shaking hands, soaking in the adoration. The mayor tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, If everyone could take their seats, we have a special presentation tonight. The room went quiet. We are here to honor a pillar of our community, the mayor boomed, a man whose generosity knows no bounds. Mr. Victor Vance. Applause erupted. Victor stood up waving humbly. I started walking down the center aisle. My dress shoes clicked loudly on the hardwood floor. At first, no one noticed. Then, heads started to turn. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who is that? Is that the handyman? I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of the stage. The applause died down awkwardly. Hunter? Victor squinted, his smile faltering. What the hell are you doing here? Security, get this trash out of here. Sheriff Miller stood up, hand on his belt. Hunter, you're violating a restraining order. I told you to stay away. I ignored Miller. I looked directly at Victor. I'm here to make a donation, I said. My voice was calm, projecting clearly to the back of the room without a microphone. You don't have a dime to your name, Victor scoffed. Go home and fix a toilet. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the USB drive. I walked up the stairs to the podium. The mayor looked too stunned to stop me. I plugged the drive into the laptop connected to the massive projector screen behind the stage. What is he doing? Clara hissed. Stop him, ladies and gentlemen, I said, leaning into the microphone. Before you give this man an award, I think you should hear his son's audition tape. I hit play. Julian's voice boomed through the auditorium speakers, terrified and sobbing. We did it. We wanted to see if he'd cry. My dad said, people like him need to learn their place. My dad called the principal. He paid her. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the hall. Victor's face went white, then red. Turn it off, he screamed, lunging for me. I sidestepped him easily. He crashed into the podium. It's a fake, Victor yelled, turning to the crowd. It's AI. He faked it. Is the bank transfer fake too, Victor? I asked. I clicked the next file. A document appeared on the giant screen. It was a bank record. A wire transfer of $50,000 from Vance Personal Holdings to an offshore account registered to Clara Roberts, the principal. Clara let out a choke and collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. And this I clicked again. A transfer to the Police Benevolent Fund, dated the exact day the investigation into Evans Burns was dropped. Sheriff Miller froze. You see, I said, turning to the crowd. Victor Vance didn't donate to the library. He bought silence. He bought the right for his son to mutilate my boy and walk away laughing. Victor was trembling. Who are you? He whispered. How did you get these? You tried to get me fired from the construction site? I said, my voice low. You called the CEO of Sterling Global to demand my termination. Victor nodded dumbly. Yeah. And he laughed at me. Do you know why he laughed? I looked out at the crowd. I looked at the people who had sneered at my truck, who had looked down on my son. Because I am Sterling Global, I said. The silence was absolute. I am Hunter Sterling. I own the firm that built this town. I own the mortgage on the school, and Victor. I leaned in close so only he could hear the final nail in the coffin. I own the bank that holds your entire fortune, and as of 5 minutes ago, I called in your loans. Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket, then Clary's, then Miller's. It was the sound of their worlds collapsing all at once. You're bankrupt, Victor, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. You're done. The auditorium was chaos. It wasn't the panic of a fire. It was the social panic of an entire hierarchy dissolving in real time. Victor stared at his phone. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and glassy like a fish pulled out of water. You can't do this, he whispered. My assets are protected. I have trusts. I have trusts. You have nothing. I cut him off. Your trusts were leveraged against your commercial properties. Properties that just failed a surprise safety audit this morning. An audit I ordered. I stepped back from the podium. The crowd was murmuring. Phones were out recording everything. The philanthropist of the year was now the most hated man in the room. Sheriff Miller tried to regain control. He was sweating. He knew his career was dangling by a thread. All right, that's enough, Miller shouted, stepping between me and Victor. Hunter, turn that screen off. This is slander. I'm taking you in for disturbing the peace and hacking. Hacking? I laughed. It was a dry, cold sound. I didn't hack anything, Sheriff. I just logged into my own company's dashboard. But if you want to talk about crimes, let's talk about obstruction of justice. I pointed to the back of the room. The double doors swung open for men in dark suits walked in. Not private security, not local cops. State police, I said. and the FBI, a tall woman in a crisp navy blazer, led them. Agent Ramirez. I'd handed over the evidence to her office 2 hours ago. Sheriff Miller, Ramirez said, her voice cutting through the noise. Please step away from Mr. Sterling. We have a warrant for your arrest. Corruption, bribery, and tampering with evidence. Miller's hand dropped from his gun. He looked around for support, but the mayor was already inching away from him on stage, trying to distance himself. I was just following orders, Miller stammered. Save it for the judge, Ramirez said. 2 officers moved in and cuffed him. The click of the metal was satisfyingly loud. Then Ramirez turned to the stage. Principal Clara Roberts, you're coming with us too. Accessory to assault and accepting a bribe. Clara didn't fight, she just sobbed, her makeup running down her face. She looked at me as they led her away. I'm sorry, Hunter, I was scared. You should have been scared of me, I said softly. Finally, Ramirez looked at Victor. Victor was backing away, bumping into the velvet curtain. You can't touch me, I know senators, I know judges. You're going to need them, I said. Agent Ramirez, did you get the audio file? We did, she nodded. And we just picked up your son Julian and his friends. They're in custody. Victor let out a roar, a sound of pure frustration and defeat. He lunged at me again, completely losing his composure. I will kill you. I will burn everything you love. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let the state troopers tackle him before he got within 5 feet of me. They slammed him into the floor of the stage right next to his philanthropist award. Get him out of here, Ramirez ordered. They dragged Victor out, kicking and screaming curses. The room was silent again. The elite of the town stared at me. The construction worker, the billionaire, the father. I walked to the microphone one last time. This isn't over, I told the room. If any of you helped cover this up, if you turned a blind eye because Victor paid for your golf club membership, my lawyers will find you. The audit has just begun. I walked off the stage. The sea of people parted for me. No one dared to meet my eyes. I walked out to my Land Rover. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I just felt tired. I got in and drove to the hospital. When I walked into Evan's room, he was awake. The news was on the TV. Breaking news. Billionaire scandal rocks Northwood. Local tycoon Victor Vance arrested. Evan looked at me. His eyes were huge. Dad, he whispered. Is that true? You own the bank. I sat down on the edge of his bed. I took a deep breath. I do, son. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to be normal, I said, choking up. I wanted you to have real friends, not people who liked you for your money. I failed you, Evan. I thought being poor would keep you safe. But evil exists everywhere. Evan looked down at his bandaged hands. Is Julian in jail? Yes, I said. He's not coming back to school. Evan let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. It's over. Almost, I said. The trap has snapped shut, but now we have to make sure they stay in the cage. I held his arm gently, avoiding the burns. We're going to be okay, kid, I promise. But even as I said it, I knew Victor wasn't the type to stay down. A wounded animal is the most dangerous kind, and I had just cornered a tiger. The days following the arrest were a blur of legal meetings and media frenzies. My secret was out. Reporters were camped at the end of my driveway. The cabin wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a fortress under siege by camera crews. I moved Evan and myself to a secure penthouse in the city, one of the few properties I hadn't sold off years ago. It had bulletproof glass and a doorman who used to be a Navy SEAL. Evan was healing physically. The bandages were off his palms, revealing angry red scars that crisscrossed his skin like a road map of pain, but the emotional scars were festering. He jumped at loud noises. He refused to go near the fireplace. I spent my days in a conference room at my law firm watching Arthur dissect the Vance empire. We have them cold on the bribery, Arthur said, sliding a file across the mahogany table. But Victor is fighting dirty. He hired Clayton Ross. I stiffened. Clayton Ross was a defense attorney known as the Butcher. He didn't win cases. He destroyed victims. What's his angle? I asked. He's going after the confession, Arthur said grimly. He's claiming you coerced a minor. He's claiming you kidnapped Julian in the woods and tortured him into speaking. If the judge throws out the tape, we lose the assault charge. It becomes a he said, she said. We need a witness. I said someone who isn't a kid. We have Clara, Arthur said the principal. Will she talk? She's wavering. She's facing 5 years for the bribe. Ross is offering her a deal. If she claims you threaten her into faking the bank transfer records, Victor will pay her legal fees and get her a reduced sentence. My jaw tightened. Clara was the weak link. If she flipped, the narrative would shift. I would go from hero father to unhinged billionaire vigilante. I need to speak to her, I said. You can't, Arthur warned. It's witness tampering. I'm not going to tamper, I said, standing up. I'm going to remind her who she really is. I drove to the county jail. It was a grim gray building. I sat in the visitation room, separated from Clara by thick glass. She looked 10 years older. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes red-rimmed. She refused to look at me. Clara, I said. Go away, Hunter. She whispered into the phone receiver. You ruined my life. You ruined it yourself when you took that money, I said. But I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to ask you about Evan. She flinched. Do you remember the talent show in 3rd grade? I asked. He forgot the words to his song. He froze on stage. You walked up there, held his hand, and sang with him until he got his confidence back. You were a good teacher, Clara. Tears leaked out of her eyes. Victor is using you, I continued. He doesn't care if you go to prison. He just wants to use you to hurt me. If you lie for him, if you help him get away with burning a child, that's your legacy. Not the library, not the school. You will be the woman who protected a monster. I'm scared, she sobbed. He said he'd hurt my daughter. I leaned closer to the glass. Victor is bankrupt. He has no power anymore. But I do. If you tell the truth, if you testify against him, I will make sure your daughter is safe. I will pay for her college myself. I will ensure she isn't punished for your mistakes. She looked up at me then, fear wearing with shame. He has people on the outside, she whispered. Dangerous people. He made a call yesterday from the jail phone. He spoke in code. My ranger instincts flared. What did he say? He said, burn the hive. That's all. Burn the hive. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The hive? That was the nickname the locals used for my cabin because of the honeycomb-shaped windows in the living room. When did he say this? I demanded an hour ago. I dropped the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I ran. I had moved Evan to the city, but I had left something at the cabin, something vital. The original hard drive with all the surveillance data, the backup evidence. But that wasn't what worried me. If Victor ordered a hit on the hive, he didn't know we had moved out. He thought Evan was still there recovering. He wasn't trying to destroy evidence. He was trying to finish the job. He was trying to burn my son alive. I sprinted to the Land Rover. I called Arthur. Get the police to the cabin now. I roared as I peeled out of the parking lot. Why? What's happening? Victor ordered a hit. He thinks we're still home. I drove like a madman. I hit 100 miles per hour on the highway. By the time I reached the turnoff for the woods, I saw it. Smoke. Thick black smoke rising above the tree line. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew Evan was safe in the city, but the violation, the intent, made me see red. I skidded into the driveway. The cabin was engulfed. Flames roared from the windows, licking up the timber walls. The heat was intense, but it wasn't empty. Parked in front of the burning house was a beat-up van. 2 men were standing there, pouring gasoline onto my porch. They turned when they saw the Land Rover. They pulled guns. I didn't brake. I floored it. The Land Rover is built like a tank. I smashed into the van, sending it spinning into the ditch. The 2 men dived out of the way. I jumped out of the car, not with a weapon, but with pure unadulterated rage. 1 man raised his pistol. I was faster. I tackled him, driving my shoulder into his gut. The gun flew into the tall grass. The 2nd man swung a tire iron. I ducked, swept his legs, and put him in a chokehold before he hit the ground. Who sent you? I screamed, tightening my grip until his face turned purple. Vance! He choked out. Vance said, no witnesses. Sirens wailed in the distance. I looked at my burning home, the place where I raised Evan, the place where I tried to be a peaceful man. It was gone, consumed by the same fire that took my son's hands. I dropped the thug to the ground. The fire reflected in my eyes. Victor wanted war. He wanted to burn things. Fine. I watched the flames eat my past from the ashes. Only the hunter remained. The fire department arrived too late to save the cabin, but the police arrived just in time to arrest the arsonists. I stood by the embers of my home, watching the water turn the flames into hissing steam. The 2 thugs were cuffed in the back of a cruiser, singing like canaries to save their own skins. Victor had made a fatal error. He had escalated from white-collar crime to attempted murder. Agent Ramirez walked up to me, the orange glow of the dying fire lighting up her face. "We have them on record," she said. "They confessed. Victor hired them through an intermediary to clean the slate. They thought your son was inside. He wanted to kill a 14-year-old boy." I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "because he lost a lawsuit." "He's desperate," Ramirez said, "and dangerous. We're moving him to solitary confinement immediately. No more phone calls, no more codes." Good. I drove back to the city. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by Evan's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest. I had promised him safety, and I had barely delivered it if I hadn't moved us yesterday. The next morning, the news broke. Billionaire arson plot. Vance indicted on attempted murder charges. The public opinion didn't just shift, it snapped. The people who had defended Victor, their friends who had stayed silent, suddenly found their voices. The school board resigned en masse. The bank's board of directors voted to liquidate Victor's remaining shares to pay for the damages, but the real battle was still in the courtroom. 2 weeks later, the trial began. It was the biggest event the county had ever seen. News vans from national networks lined the streets. People held signs, "Justice for Evan and rich kids don't rule." I walked into the courthouse holding Evan's hand. He was wearing a suit I bought him. His scarred hands visible. I told him not to hide them. "Let them see," I whispered. "Your scars are the truth." Victor was sitting at the defense table. He looked like a ghost of himself, gaunt, pale, his expensive haircut grown out and messy. When he saw me, his eyes burned with hatred, but he didn't say a word. Clayton Ross, his lawyer, looked less confident than before. The prosecution's case was a sledgehammer. First, the digital forensics, the emails, the bank transfers, the texts between Julian and his friends bragging about the campfire. Then the arsonists. They testified that Victor had promised them $50,000 each to burn the cabin down with us inside. But the turning point was Clara. She took the stand in her orange jumpsuit. She looked small and broken. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Clara Roberts." "Ms. Roberts, did you knowingly delete security footage from the school cameras on the day of the incident?" "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" She looked at Victor. Then she looked at me. Then finally, she looked at Evan because Victor Vance told me that if I didn't, he would destroy me. He told me that boys like Julian were born to rule, and boys like Evan were born to serve. He said it was just natural selection. A gasp went through the courtroom. The jury, 12 ordinary people, looked at Victor with pure disgust. "He paid me," Clara continued weeping, "and he paid the sheriff. It was a system. It had been going on for years. Anytime one of their sons got in trouble, money made it go away." Victor slammed his fist on the table. "She's lying. She's a thief." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," the judge roared. Clayton Ross put a hand on Victor's shoulder, forcing him down. He knew it was over. "You can defend against evidence, but you can't defend against the moral outrage of a community that realizes it has been sold out." Then came the final witness. The prosecution calls Evan Hunter. Evan squeezed my hand one last time. He walked to the stand. He looked terrified, but he sat down and raised his right hand. "Evan," the prosecutor asked gently, "can you show the jury your hands?" Evan lifted them. The courtroom went dead silent. The scars were thick, ropey, and angry red. The pinky finger on his left hand was permanently curled, the tendon damaged beyond repair. "Who did this to you?" Evan looked directly at Julian, who was sitting in the back row in a juvenile detention uniform. "Julian did," Evan said clearly, "and his father helped him hide it." Victor put his head in his hands. It wasn't a legal victory. It was a moral execution. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They came back with a verdict that would echo through the state for years. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The foreman of the jury stood up. He was an older man, a mechanic with grease under his fingernails, the kind of man Victor Vance had spent his life looking down on. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Holloway asked. "We have, Your Honor." Victor stood up, his legs shaking. Clayton Ross didn't even bother to stand with him. He was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the sinking ship. "On the count of conspiracy to commit assault in the first degree," the foreman read, "we find the defendant, Victor Vance, guilty." A ripple of noise started, but the judge gave it down instantly on the count of bribery of a public official. "Guilty." Victor flinched with each word like he was being physically struck. "On the count of obstruction of justice." "Guilty." and on the count of attempted murder in the first degree regarding the arson of the Hunter residence. Guilty. The dam broke. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, spectators cheered, and Victor collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Order! Judge Holloway shouted, banging the gavel so hard I thought the handle would snap. Order in this court. It took 5 minutes for the bailiffs to quiet the room. Victor Vance, the judge said, her voice icy. You used your wealth as a weapon. You corrupted public officials. You terrorized a child. And when you were caught, you tried to burn a family alive to cover your tracks. You are a danger to society. She adjusted her glasses. Sentencing is set for next week, but given the severity of these crimes and the flight risk, bail is revoked immediately. You will be remanded to custody. 2 bailiffs moved in. They pulled Victor's hands behind his back. I watched him. I wanted to see his eyes one last time. As they marched him past the prosecution table, he looked at me. There was no arrogance left, no threat, just the hollow, terrified look of a man who knows he is going to a place where his money means nothing. Hunter, he rasped. Please, I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. The silence was my answer. They dragged him out the side door. Then it was Julian's turn. His hearing was in juvenile court, closed to the public, but the result was public record. Because of the severity of the torture, the premeditation, he was sentenced to a secure juvenile detention facility until he turned 21. No country club rehab, no suspended sentence, real time. I walked out of the courthouse with Evan. The steps were crowded with cameras. Mr. Sterling, a reporter from CNN, shouted, "How do you feel? Is this justice?" I stopped. I looked down at Evan. He wasn't hiding his hands in his pockets anymore. He was standing tall. Justice isn't a verdict, I said into the microphones. Justice is making sure this never happens to another kid because his father isn't a billionaire. I walked through the crowd to the Land Rover. We drove in silence for a long time. We didn't go back to the city. We drove out to the edge of town, past the burnt remains of our cabin, to a spot overlooking the valley. Dad? Evan asked. Yeah, what do we do now? It was a good question. The war was over. The enemy was destroyed, but we were left with the wreckage. We rebuilt, I said, but not here. I pulled a folder out of the glove box. I bought a ranch, I said. In Wyoming, massive horses, mountains, a river running right through the backyard. In a music studio, a real one. Evan looked at me, his eyes lighting up for the first time in months. Really? Really? And I set up something else. I handed him the paper. It was the incorporation document for the Evan Hunter Foundation. We're going to use the settlement money, I explained. Every dime we took from Victor, every dime from the lawsuit against the school, it's all going into this. It will pay for legal defense for victims of bullying. It will pay for medical bills for kids who get hurt and can't afford it. Evan ran his scarred fingers over the paper. My name, your legacy, I said. They tried to destroy you, Evan, but instead, they only made you stronger. He gazed out at the fading light. For the first time, he didn't carry the look of someone broken. He carried the look of someone who had made it through. Wyoming feels good, he said quietly. It really is, I smiled back. Though there's a lot of firewood to cut, maybe I'll just hire someone for that this time. He let out a laugh, rough around the edges but genuine. The ordeal was finally behind us. The old soldier could finally put his guard down. 6 months had passed, and Wyoming felt worlds apart from the East Coast. The air here was lighter, purer, carrying the scent of pine and snowfall instead of old wealth and buried secrets. From the porch of our new ranch house, I watched Evan guide a gentle mare named Echo across the lower field. He rode without gloves now. He no longer hid his hands. The scars remained, thin pale lines stretching across his palms and fingers, but they had become part of who he was, marks of survival rather than shame. I took another sip of my coffee. Out here, the quiet felt different, nothing like the suffocating stillness of the cabin. This silence brought calm. My phone buzzed against the porch railing. An email from the foundation's director, subject line reading, "New case approved." A young girl in Ohio being bullied by the mayor's son. Her legal team had just been funded, and already the bully was retreating. I couldn't help but smile. Victor Vance was serving the first year of a 20-year sentence in federal prison. Every asset he owned had been stripped away, his mansion sold off to cover settlements. But his downfall wasn't really the victory here. The real win was that his stolen fortune was now shielding children he would have once looked down on. Evan guided the horse back into the stable and made his way up to the porch, looking healthier now. Color returned to his face after months in the mountain air. "Hey Dad," he said, reaching for an apple from the bowl on the table. "How's your hand doing?" I asked. He flexed his fingers slowly, the motion still a bit rigid but working. "Better," he said. "The therapy's paying off. I can actually close my fist now." He glanced over at the guitar resting against the wall. A new one, a custom Gibson built with a slimmer neck that was easier for him to hold. "I wrote something," he said, almost too quietly to hear. I set my coffee down. "You did?" "Yeah. It's not perfect. I can't do the fast chord changes anymore, but I figured out another way to play it. Slower, open tuning." "Let me hear it," I said. He settled onto the railing and picked up the guitar. His scarred fingers hesitated for a moment against the strings before finding their rhythm. Gone was the complicated technical playing he used to be known for. What replaced it was simple and unguarded, a melody that drifted quietly across the mountainside. He wasn't singing about anger or getting even. He was singing about the forest, about darkness, and about the light waiting on the other side of it. As he played, something became clear to me. I had spent my entire life as a soldier, a hunter, a ruthless businessman, believing that strength meant crushing whoever stood against you, that power was measured by how much pain you could deliver, or how completely you could force someone to yield. But watching my son create music with hands that had been burned down to bone, I understood how wrong I'd been. Real strength has nothing to do with how hard you can strike someone, it's about how you put yourself back together after you've been shattered. When the final note faded into the wood of the porch, I felt my throat tighten. "That was beautiful," I told him. Evan smiled, and this time it reached his eyes completely. "Thanks, Dad, for everything, for hunting them down, but mostly for saving me." "I didn't save you, kid," I said, rising to rest a hand on his shoulder. "You saved yourself. I just cleared the way." We stood together in silence, watching the sun sink behind the Tetons, staining the sky gold and violet. The fire that once consumed us had burned out completely. The ashes had finally been swept away, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the soldier inside me didn't need to keep fighting ghosts. He was simply a father now, and that, finally, was enough.